Hello everyone and welcome back to the Age of Warhammer. I'm Valhamma, back again with another review. This time we have Codex Chaos Daemons on the table. Thank you to Games Workshop for sending us the review copy. Let's dive into it nice and quick. So as you can see, you've got some nice new cover art. This was previewed on Warcom, but it does stand up in person. Demons taking on the Sisters of Battle, got all four pantheons represented on the cover. Back cover, nice big army shot of Be'lakor and some demons, and the usual blurb. Quick overview of the book on the inside, the standard 9th edition cover, and then to cover the contents very quickly. So it's a 151-page book, 32 pages of lore and art, 12-page showcase of painted miniatures, and then around about 100 pages of rules and data sheets, including Crusade rules and the reference at the back. First thing I will say about this book, having had a read through it, is it's surprisingly meta. It very much treats itself as if it is a forbidden tome, which is it's written in a nice, fun way. Clearly, the writer had quite a lot of fun with this one. Things like these hand-scrawled text down the side. There's a few of those dotted through the book that kind of tell a story of almost like an inquisitor has been through and marked this book up as being dangerous, and they've tried to protect the reader from it. It's a nice touch. It makes it feel very in-universe, which is good. It very much refocuses it back on the demons. It's not written from a necessarily an imperial perspective. It's very much, there's lots of little bits of kind of cultist activity and stuff that's mentioned. It's very, very cool. Opening of the book, the first few pages are kind of on the basics of the nature of demons in 40k. Things like how they're summoned, when they're summoned, how they behave, where they reside within the warp. So if you're a new player to 40k and don't really know much about how that side of Chaos works, the opening section really does give you a good overview of how they fit into the narrative of the 40k universe. Something I did quite like is they make very clear distinction between demons that are summoned into subservience and those that are summoned into battle, and how well or badly that goes for those that have summoned them. It's a nice little touch just to showcase. You've got lots of little bits of artwork, some of which at least I've not seen before. I can't speak to whether it is genuinely new, but it's new to me. A few nice little short stories going through as well, always nice for a bit of flavour text. A bit about the war unending, mainly from the Inquisition point of view, and it calls out nicely the double-edged sword of the Imperium's defences against demons. So the Imperium very much focuses on the idea of ignorance being a primary defence against the demon. The less that the citizens know, the less damage they can do with that knowledge. However, while it prevents panic, it also prevents personal defense, so these people cannot prey or steal their souls against possession by demons because they don't know they exist. As the era Indomitus continues and the presence of demon becomes more common, on top of that, the Inquisition are having to rely on more extreme measures to kind of ensure that demons don't get out and knowledge doesn't spread. But in the suppression and, in many cases, execution of the citizens with knowledge, it leads to more fear and suspicion in the Imperial populace about the Inquisition and the Imperium itself, which feeds the kind of the gateway to chaos. So they end up becoming their own worst enemy in a way of pushing themselves further and further towards these incursions. It's a nice touch. It just kind of touches nicely on the nature of the Imperium and the Inquisition and that really horrific, controlling, fascist, dangerous organisation the Imperium is, but how necessary it is for them at the same time, given the nature of the rest of the galaxy. It doesn't pull any punches. It's quite cool. It's nice to see. The next section of the lore is broken down into four, one for each of the major gods. First up you have Khorne, then Tzeentch, then Nurgle, then Slaanesh. You get kind of a 2-page spread on the god themselves, so again, if you're new to 40k, that explains who Khorne is as a god, same with the others that come later on. And a bit about either their demons or their marks or how they operate, how they perceive themselves and how they're widely perceived by their followers. One thing that should be noted is that, particularly for Slaanesh and Khorne, both of them are mentioned through the lens of other civilizations. You get kind of little insights into Khorne as he's worshipped by previously kind of Xenos species or even non-imperial humans. Same with Slanesh, and a couple of the little names they drop will be familiar to many longer term players. Each of them also gets a war zone. This is sort of like an exemplary battle where each particular god got their kind of one-upmanship on their enemies. The Khorne one in particular I really like. It starts off as Imperials versus Orcs, and the scale of the conflict just grows and grows and grows until a warp rift is created and the demons of Khorne come marching through. The very strength of the Imperial planet and the Orcs used against them in this instance. Tzeentch, classic tale of misdirection and falsehood under the Warzone Garmesh. Again, some really nice art of kind of the capering horrors and Tzeentch discs and flame that he's known for, or they're known for. Nurgle. Nurgle's battle was an interesting one, the Warzone Malior. It's one that starts off and is potentially, quite on point at the moment. Starts off with this sickness that there is a treatment for, and the indoctrination of the Imperials that works against them here. And this backwater planet doesn't trust the nobles and doesn't trust the medics offering technology. They only trust in their faith, and ends up basically creating a warp rift into the Garden of Nurgle. As these sick peasants form a kind of critical mass. It's a very cool little story. Slanesh's one, Persephone. First of all, we'll cover the god himself. I really liked this entry. It's my favourite of the 4 entries. It covers Slaanesh from an interesting angle, highlighting that they're often seen as the weakest of the Chaos gods. But despite that, they're often the one that gets unconsciously worshipped by its followers. There are obviously dedicated followers of Slaanesh, but a cornate gladiator who focuses too much on the perfection of their blade work, or a Tzeentchian cultist who is too proud and prideful and arrogant in their knowledge, falls into the same bucket of excess. So both of these examples are giving unconscious worship to Slaanesh and strengthening Slaanesh in the warp, even if they have dedicated themselves to one of the other gods. Really nice touch about how insidious chaos is even to itself, and highlights the nature of the great game and how these deities work not only against the Imperium and the other races, but against themselves and each other at times. It's very, very cool, very nice. The Warzone is an interesting one. It talks about how an Imperial world that was very weak and becomes strong ends up going too far down that path and goes down a very Emperor's Children kind of route. Kind of the same history repeating itself, so leads into that whole doomed Imperium, same mistakes, same knowledge not being shared, causing problems type thing. It's a nice touch, I like it. Finishing up the lore section, we have a double-page split on the Great Rift, on Be'lakor, a little 4-page White Dwarf style short story, and then the Eye of Terror. The Great Rift section mainly aims to refocus the attention on just how dangerous the Rift is in and of itself. A lot of focus in the narrative at the moment is very much on the Rift as a barrier, as a thing that stops us getting, or the Imperium getting, from Imperium Sanctus to Imperium Nihilus. And the Rift itself is never really portrayed as a threat in those situations, it's just an obstacle. This section really aims to highlight the fact that the Rift itself is still a series of interlinked warp storms of vast and terrible proportions, and is in and of itself a massive threat not only to the planets that border it, but to the wider Imperium. The veil is very thin at the moment in many areas of the Imperium, and it's down to the existence of the Rift. The Be'lakor section, this feels primarily used to bring focus onto him a bit more. For many editions now, he's kind of been a background character. It's someone that hasn't been front and centre in a lot of the narrative, which fits the fact that he is the Prince of Shadows and sits in the dark and manipulates and puppeteers. But obviously with his shiny new model and him very much becoming a frontline figure, literally and metaphorically, within the 40k and the Age of Sigmar universes, this feels very much like an attempt to bring him front and centre in people's minds. Highlight the fact that he is a major player. He's not this cast aside former relic of a previous time. He is in and of himself an amazing and incredible threat to the sanctity of the Imperium. Talks about civilization after civilization that he has essentially raised up with them believing that he is their god, only to deliberately put them into catastrophic civil wars to destroy themselves purely on a whim because he got bored of them, and he'll start the process all over again. Talks about him being a very cunning strategist and battlefield commander. It very much brings him to the fore as a threat, which is a nice touch. The Eye of Terror section, nothing really new here other than the map. A lot of it is just about reminding players new and old that the Eye of Terror is still its own discrete thing within the Greater Rift. It still exists. There's a nice note here about the Chrome Worlds, the original Eldari homeworlds, that still exist and reside in the core of the Eye of Terror, and are a tempting target for would-be looters for all the ancient Eldari technology that remains there. Lots of cool little kind of tidbits. The map itself does highlight that it's now a part of the Greater Rift. You've got all the kind of the purple and reds that spiral out from the centre. The former site of the Cadian Gate is obviously a fairly major change, and the Husk of Cadia, as it's now labelled on here, showing that things have changed and moved on quite severely. There's some interesting ones around anomalies as well. So the Infinite Cascade, the Therendite, and the Kincaid anomaly, and Eidolon as well, which is another one just there. Nothing really is given about these at the moment in this. They may exist in some of the newer books I've not got around to reading, but they are highlighted as very much being things that we don't know much about from this perspective in this book. Space Marine homeworlds are listed on here as well. You've got Medusa, Perikar. So it's highlighting there is still an Imperial presence around the Eye of Terror. The fall of Cadia didn't end the kind of the curtain wall around the Eye of Terror. It just made a massive hole in it. And even then, you've got the Agrippina subsector just behind Cadia, so it's kind of just pushed out from that centre point and widened where the Eye of Terror kind of exists. After that, you've got the showcase. These are common to all the codexes, so I'll slip through it fairly quickly. Again, it's all kind of split down page by page, god by god. They've got their own coloured backings on the pages for each god, which is a really nice touch, nice little quality of life improvement. Really ties the book together as this kind of cacophony of colours and chaos, while also giving each god their own kind of prominence on each page. Be'lakor naturally gets his own dark grey, showcasing that he is the Lord of Shadow, the Dark Master. Some really nice wide army shots here. Sorry, I'm just going to tilt that down just to get rid of some of the glare. Really nice kind of wide army shots of the armies as a whole. You've got Great Unclean One, Bloodthirster, Lord of Change, Keeper of Secrets, and Be'lakor all on the table at the same time. It's just very, very cool. Into the rules themselves. The opening section of this is fairly standard to all the codexes. You've got the breakdown on this page here of all the content, and then you go into it, you've got the combat patrol, the standard example painted version of the combat patrol, and then the detachment abilities. I'm not going to focus too heavily on the rule side of this book, purely because there are other YouTube channels that have a better matched play understanding of these sorts of things that will give you a much better overview. But I do want to give you an understanding of what the book contains, so I'll keep it fairly high level. I'm not going to dive into details about combos and options, things like that, but to give you an overview, the standard rules of an army of all demons that is battle forged gains the objective secured for all its troop units, and then you gain the 3 rules linked to that around demonic legions, demonic relics, and demonic allies. Demonic legions is an interesting one. If you include any greater demon units, one of them, you can have multiple greater demons, one of them must be your warlord, unless the army includes Be'lakor, in which case he must be your warlord. For every greater demon you include in a detachment, you can also include a herald with the same allegiance keyword, so Khorne, Slaanesh, Tzeentch, and Nurgle, without taking up a battlefield role slot, so you get that kind of free Force Org slot for a herald if they're attached to a greater demon. The demonic relics, again, standard text. If your army includes a demonic warlord, you can give 1 demonic character from your army a relic. Obviously, if you're playing with the newest version of the match play rules at the time of recording, you have to pay a CP for that, but there are relics for each of the 4 gods. Demonic allies. This one is going to be an interesting one for any Heretic Astartes players. You can include up to 25% of your army as demons without losing your detachment abilities on either side, demon or Heretic Astartes. If you're playing a generic legion like Black Legion, Iron Warriors, you're not tied to any specific god or any specific allegiance. However, if you're playing one of the cult armies, so World Eaters, Thousand Sons, Death Guard, or Emperor's Children, you must take demons that match your god. So World Eaters can only have Khorne demons, etc, etc. Again, really nice flavourful rule. I think there's a lot in this book that Heretic Astartes players are going to like. You do lose some of the more powerful abilities of the army, which I'll come to in a second. But the option to throw some demons into a marine list is a nice touch. I like it. It's a nice one. Really nice full page spread. I know we've seen this one before. I think as part of the Dark Imperium series this one was done. But it's just a really nice piece of artwork. Data sheet abilities, so allegiance keywords. There are a very small selection of unaligned demons in this book. The Soul Grinder, the Demon Prince, maybe one other that I can't remember off the top of my head. They must be given a godly allegiance. You cannot have an undivided Demon Prince anymore. I think that's a bit of a shame. They were always kind of quite a key and interesting aspect of the background. Not the end of the world though, and the Khorne and Tzeentch and Noble stuff is quite cool. I'll come to that when we get to their page. Malefic weapons. This is a new addition. So a lot of particularly the larger demons, some of the cavalry, the greater demons especially, have an additional weapon called a malefic weapon. And this is normally something that's kind of tied to the model in some way. Blood Crushers, for example, you have the attacks characteristic on your stat line to represent primarily the blood letter on the back, and then the Blood Crusher that he sits on has a malefic weapon for his horn. So you can make additional attacks with that when in combat. One of the key kind of definitions of the demons is this new demonic ability. That carries us throughout the entire book. Everything has it, as far as I can tell. And that again is just a way of highlighting, much like with the Adeptus Astartes keywords, things like that. Gives you a number of special rules. So the first one is demonic invulnerability. As you all have seen on Warcom, the way that demon saves work has changed. You no longer have an invulnerable save, it's now a demonic save, which is a very important differential. But it's also split into two categoristics. You have a melee save and a ranged save. Personally, I would have liked them if they displayed them the other way around, as the shooting phase comes before the combat phase. That feels more logical to me, but yeah, the left hand save is your melee save, the right hand save is your ranged save. As a standard demon save, you're looking at a 5+ in melee and a 4 up at range. Obviously that changes with certain demons and certain gods, but that's the average demon save throughout the book. It is, however, not able to be affected by AP. It is unmodifiable in any way, so you always have that save. Kind of like the Night Taunt for Age of Sigmar. Manifestation is the next ability it gives you. This is sort of like a deep strike. It's to represent, you know, the veil thinning in a demonic incursion and pulling additional demons through in the right part of the battlefield to cause the most damage. There's a couple ways you can set these up. Normally, you set them up pretty much like any other deep striker. Anywhere on the battlefield, more than 9 from the enemy or more than 6 away from enemy models and within 6 of a warp locus. Warp locus is a new keyword that appears throughout the book. They act as kind of beacons for these manifestations, so you can deploy a bit closer to the enemy, up to 6 inches away from them. If your army is entirely demons, however, you have 2 other deployment options. The first is wholly within your deployment zone and more than 3 inches from enemy models. And bear in mind you can charge from deep strike, or deployment of any kind, so you know you can charge from this. 3 inches away in your own deployment zone. If you're in no man's land, you deploy a number of equal inches away from the enemy unit equal to the current leadership characteristic. I love this rule. I think it's really characterful. As the kind of the willpower of the enemy decreases, your demons are kind of summoned to them that little bit closer. So excuse me. That's a minimum of 3 inches and a maximum of 9 inches. So it can never be worse than a standard deep strike, but it can be a lot better. On top of that, you have a rule called Demonic Terror, up in the top right there. This subtracts 1 from enemy leadership for demon units within 6. It doesn't say it stacks for multiple units, it doesn't say it doesn't. My take would be that it is stackable for each unit that is within 6. That best represents, the overwhelming terror of having multiple demon units closing on you. And there are caps on how much it can affect you for manifestation. But it is also -1 for combat attrition tests, so you will start to lose models quite quickly. The final thing that gives you access to is the Warp Storm. Now this is to represent quite literally the warp itself being pulled through those gaps in reality and affecting the reality of the battlefield. These are a selection of abilities split between Undivided and the 4 gods. Some of these are really, really good, some of them are cheaper but not quite as dangerous. It's a really cool mechanic. It'll take a bit of reading to get your head around. There's a lot of abilities you can overlap and use in tandem. The way it works is you roll 8 dice at the start of a battle round. For every 4 up you roll, you have a Warp Storm point. These do not carry over turn to turn as standard, but you can gain them through other means, so you're not capped at 8 per turn, you can generate more. However, as I say, it doesn't carry over turn to turn normally. There are ways of modifying that. The best combination I've found so far is a way to carry over 6 Warp Storm points from turn to turn that are left unspent. So you could generate a load on turn 1 and then just not use any, and then have all of your turn 1 points and all of your turn 2 points to spend turn 2. It involves having a number of units from Nurgle's Ancient Slanesh with various warlord traits. I think there was a psychic power and there's an exalted ability, all combined, so it's not cheap to do, but does potentially open up some of these more expensive ones like Dark Invigoration a bit more easily, if you did want to pursue that. You can't use the same power twice in one battle round. You can use them more than once per game though. Most of the gods have some way built into their little book of how to generate more, like Khorne can generate more through sacrifices of the enemy, in theory. Things like that. So there are ways of improving it beyond just the dice roll. But it does have a chaotic element that's not something you can necessarily guarantee on. You can play the averages and build your battle plan around it. I would be taking these as extras and bonuses on top of your battle plan, not as fundamental elements of it. Unless you had planned to the nth degree to make sure you had guaranteed points. They're a mixture of things like powers to heal or replace models, increase the leadership debuff of demons against the enemy, improve your unit stats or their weaponry, and mess with enemy psychers. So there's a range of things you can play on that will fit a varying kind of different style of armies. Really cool, well worth a proper read through. The datasheets now, and it'll become apparent on this page, the datasheets are split into 5 books, in inverted commas. You have each of the gods has a book of their own, contains its own stratagems, warlord traits, relics, the datasheets for all of their demons, and the new Exalted abilities. These have changed a little bit. It used to be, particularly for things like the Bloodthirsters, you would buy specific types of Bloodthirster based on the model. That has now changed. You now have a trio of Exalted abilities, 3 per god. You buy them with points or power, kind of like Chapter Master upgrades for Space Marines. Each of them gives you a different buff for your greater demon, makes them Exalted, gives them an Exalted keyword, things like that. They're very cool. They're a nice way of adding a bit more personalisation to your models. Will they see use? I think so. There are on a skim through some that are better than others, but they're pretty well balanced from a first high level read. And again, I'm not a very competitive player, so I'm sure someone will correct me on that as this gets out into the wild and people start playing with it. Between Exalted abilities, warlord traits, relics, and the weapon changes, so you can have any Bloodthirster with any kind of weapon and whatever Exalted ability, you've got a lot of choice, a lot of customization. You can mix and match things in a much more free-form way than you could in previous books, which I really like. In terms of new stuff, Khorne hasn't really gained any new units per se, other than the Skull Altar, which was a model that came out for AOS in 2019, I think. This you can use to gain additional Warpstorm points by having a Herald on it, doing ritual sacrifice action. It's quite situational. You've got to be very careful about where you place it, but beyond that, it's a nice little touch. Tzeentch have been toned down a little bit. There's no more rerollable 3-up invulnerable saves, things like that, but they're still very good. The Exalted abilities combined with the Lord of Change, combined with Warlord traits, things like that, you can create proper psychic powerhouses in these units. As is right and proper, these are Tzeentch's, right-hand birds. These are his most powerful, or its most powerful servants and kind of demigods. You can put out a lot of mortal wound potential. It can heal itself for the mortal wounds it does. There's loads of options here. You can basically kind of tweak them to be what you want them to do. But again, very much around range. They don't really have much in the way of a combat unit other than maybe the Screamers. A lot of it's around kind of short-range flame attacks, as we've seen before. They haven't changed the nature of Tzeentch in particular, which is nice. That's kind of what you want. Nurgle, probably the most durable. Nurgle's had a bit of a glow-up. So things like the Plague Bearers are now toughness 5 and 2 wounds. Combined with the unmodifiable save, they're going to be tough to put down in any kind of meaningful way. They are now 7 power, so they're quite expensive, but you do get a lot for that defense. The saves across the board are pretty much the 5-4 average I mentioned earlier. I think that makes sense given the high toughness and high wounds. If they had any better save, you're going to really struggle against them. It feels like a nice touch point that if you do manage to get through that toughness, they're not quite as defensible. They just have a lot of wounds to take a lot of damage. They don't necessarily have armor or anything to deflect blows. Slaanesh is an interesting one. They are very fast. Easily the fastest of the 4 deities, as you'd expect given the nature of them. They have a large number of attacks. To put it into context, the Keeper of Secrets has on its top profile 10 attacks total, plus charge bonus, and there are ways of gaining extra attacks from things like the Warp Storm table as well. Their movement is usually somewhere between kind of 9-ish, I think. So the standard Demonettes is movement 10, Seekers are movement 16. I think the slowest movement is actually the Intractress, which, given that she's hauling a harp around, movement 9 seems about right. They do have quite a lot of debuffs as well, generally around the to-hit roll. There's lots of -1 from the hit roll for their speed or their kind of enrapturing appearance. And again, their save is largely 5-4 across the board. They're not very durable on save. Their toughness isn't as good as Nurgle. Their wounds aren't as good as Nurgle. Their survivability comes from debuffing the actual attack. As far as I can see reading this book, there is no limitation on the number of gods you can combine into a single force. There's no limitations on greater demons, other than the Force Org chart itself, obviously. So you can really go nuts in combining the different elements of the 4 gods together into a single kind of warp incursion, which is cool. You can maximise a collection. Equally, a mono-god army doesn't feel out of place. It feels like it's a very viable prospect. So I'm really interested to see what people are going to do with that going forward. Into the final piece, the Book of the Warp. As I say, there's not a lot in here. You've got the Noctic Discipline, which is predominantly for Be'lakor. You've got the Soul Grinder and the Demon Prince of Chaos, and that's kind of it. Both of these have to take one of the gods as their patron. Be'lakor has all 4 gods because he is a Demon Prince and the first Demon Prince of the Undivided. He's very, very cool. He's 20 wounds, toughness 7, strength 8. He's got buffs and debuffs all over the place. He's a proper centerpiece model now, which is very, very cool. He does also bring an army of renown, the Disciples of Be'lakor, and this is a way of combining every aspect of Chaos into one army if you really want to. You can go pure demon, you can just take Be'lakor and Legions Astartes or Heretic Astartes, but I think the strength of this is going to come from combining the 2 together. There's quite a lot of heavy restrictions: no demon princes, no named characters, greater demons, demon engines, cult units, chaos knights, other than the one you get from House Raven, or titans. Must have more Astartes than cultists, cannot have demons and mortals in the same detachment, so you can be paying CP for detachments to take multiple types of chaos. So there are a lot of restrictions. To that end, I don't know if it will see competitive play, especially with the CP cuts in the latest match play side. However, it's very fun, it's very fluffy, it's very thematic. and fits Be'lakor to a T. The other restriction is you can't have 2 of any demon, god-specific demon, without having 1 of each first. So if you have a Bloodlethy unit, a Demonette unit, a Plaguebearer unit, and a Flamer unit, you'd have to have 1 of each before you could add a second Bloodlethy unit, and that continues through, so you need to have 2 of each to get the third of another type thing. You do get some keywords for function stratagems. Demons and Traitorous Astartes get their own keyword around the Disciple of Be'lakor. You can include a Chaos Knight from House Corvax as the former House Raven. Be'lakor in the lore has somewhat relocated their homeworld and corrupted some of their knights. Troops become OBSEC across the board for mortal and demon. You cannot access or count as Legion specific for Astartes for relics, strats, powers or traits. Psykers get the Noctis discipline instead of any Legion specific or Chaos specific discipline for their powers. And instead of any Legion traits, you get the Disciples of Shadows, which I think is actually quite powerful. Probably not enough to override the limitations for a lot of match play players, but +1 to combat attrition, so when you're below half, you still only fail on a 1. And each time a ranged attack is made against this unit, if you're more than 12 inches away from the enemy, they subtract 1 from their attack roll, so you've got some durability in there as well. But you do obviously lose all of the Legion specific stuff to get that. Has its own set of stratagems, as all the AORs do. Again, they're fine. It's a fun little way of building an army. We'll see how people take to it in terms of serious play. On to my favourite bit of any codex in 9th edition, Crusade rules. Crusade for me is the best part of 9th edition. I think they've absolutely smashed the idea out of the park. Yes, it's unbalanced in places. Yes, it's a bit silly in places, but it's so much fun, and the potential for storytelling is immense. Start off with the fairly standard stuff, so you have agendas. Each god has their own agenda you can take. You also have a undivided agenda you can take. These are purely for experience, as we know. They don't gain you kind of ways of winning the battle, it's just ways of developing your units. They're all very thematic, very fluffy, and a lot of fun to try and get. Requisitions, again, I think they smashed this out of the park. You don't start with Exalted Demons in Crusade, you have to get to a certain level and then make them Exalted. It's not particularly high, you only have to get to Battle Hardened, so I think it's 16 experience points to become Exalted as a minimum. Dark Gambit and Monstrous Duel are ways of increasing your god's influence. Ignoble Defeat and Glorious Return are 2 of my favourites though. If one of your characters is destroyed in a game and fails the out of action, one of your other characters, specifically a Greater Demon, can bind that character into their weapon. So say for example you had a Bloodthirster and a Blue Scribe, say for example. If the Blue Scribe failed its out of action test, your Bloodthirster just sucks it into its axe, and the axe is now imbued with the power of this Tzeentchian demon, which is very cool. Glorious Return allows that bound demon to escape the axe, and they gain experience points depending on how many battles they were played as a weapon. Then we get some interesting stuff. So anyone that's played 40k for more than 6 years will remember 7th edition. And the 7th edition Demons Codex had upgrades called Loki of the Gods and Lesser, Greater and Exalted Rewards. These have now made a comeback in the Crusade rules. So you have these Loki of the Gods, there's 2 per god, they're all very specific, which you can gain as auras, sort of like kind of the, again, Chapter Master and Captain auras that you can get through being promoted into a specific company. These are very cool. Again, it's Crusade, they're not necessarily balanced, but they are good fun. And then I'll come back to that in a minute. Lesser, Greater and Exalted rewards. Again, these were drawn upon from the 7th edition Codex. I really like them. Again, it's a way of making your individual Greater Demons really unique and characterful, make them very specific to you. It's not just the second Bloodthirster from the left, it's, you know, Angoran the Beheader, or whatever you want to call them. But you can really customise and make them very much your own creations, which is very cool, and why Crusade is, for me, so good. The core of the Crusade system for demons is unlike most of the others. Demons aren't bothered too much about material gain in the real universe. They want to spill the warp into it, but they can't remain there long enough for it to make a difference. That's not their goal in the short term. What is the goal of the gods is the Great Game. This is an area of the lore that's been in since pretty much day one. All of the gods hate each other. All of the gods want to beat each other. So you start off with them in this order of kind of strength: Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, Slaanesh. As you play games, depending on the makeup of your army, which characters you have and which agendas you pick, the gods gain ascendancy points and they can leapfrog each other and change position. And depending on which gods are in which position, your demons gain different benefits. So if Khorne is in first place, all of your Khorne demons get +1 leadership, and once per battle you can use an epic deed stratagem for 0 CP. That can obviously change, and you can somewhat act as the puppet master yourself and act behind the scenes to kind of promote your favourite gods. So if you play an all Nurgle army, you're going to want to focus on the Nurgle stuff, because they start in third place, you get no benefit to start with, and then over time you move them up to first place. There is a round mechanic built into this, so every 8 rounds, every 8 games you play, a round of the Great Game ends, and at the end of that you distribute these rewards across your army based on where your god sits. So if you play, as I say you play a Nurgle army, and because you're focused on Nurgle, Nurgle finishes in first place. All of your Nurgle demons gain 3 experience, and you select 1 greater demon, so a great unclean one, to get 1 of each of these rewards. That's really cool. That's really, really characterful, really flavourful. It really encourages you to play to the nature of your army and really engage in the great game itself. I think they've absolutely knocked it out of the park on that. Psychic Fortitude battle traits, all the standard Crusade upgrades, Crusade relics, the sort of thing we see in all the books, obviously just demon specific. Example of a Crusade army, this is a mono Khorne build, looks brilliant. The highlighting work on these models is stunning, the kind of the flayed flesh look. Big fan of that. And then we're into weapon profiles, a bit of old art which we've seen and loved. I think that was a Codex cover from possibly 7th edition. Points values, reference and glossary, and finally, again, debatable how useful this is, but the Great Game Ascendancy point tracker that you can use for your Crusade games as well. So that is the Codex, guys. That is everything that I can show you. As I say, I really like it. I think it's a very characterful and flavourful book. It's got a lot of moving parts to it. It's got a learning curve to it. It's not as complicated as AdMech were when they arrived on the scene, but there's going to be a lot of discussion for players internally around what Warp Storm abilities they want to target, what Warlord traits are worth taking, what Exalted abilities are worth taking, what relics best work with all of those combined, how many of each god you take, how many of each demon you take. There's a lot of internal choices to make in this book, which fits the nature. I really hope players are going to enjoy it. Like I say, I'm not a match play player, I'm much more of a narrative player, but to me it comes off as being a very well put together book. Hopefully match play players are also as enthused about it. I'm really keen to get a game in against the demons. I think that'd be a really fun army to play against, and having to try and counter that chaos is going to be a lot of fun. But we will see. But that's it from me today. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any feedback, please leave it in the comments, and I will see you all next time.